On a green slope, rising above the northwestern shore of the Sea of Galilee, somewhere in the neighborhood of the year 28, a young carpenter from Nazareth stopped walking, turned to look at the crowd that had been following him for miles, and sat down in the grass. What he said over the next hour or so has never been surpassed by any teacher, any philosopher, any lawgiver, any moral thinker in the entire recorded history of the human race. We call it the Sermon on the Mount. It is the deepest teaching Jesus ever gave, and it is about to be explained to you in a way that will change how you live. Understand where you are standing. This is not a cathedral. There is no pulpit, no marble, no stained glass, no choir. There is a hillside of coarse Galilean grass, still green from the winter rains, sloping down toward a lake so blue in the morning light that it looks like a piece of the sky has fallen into the valley. Behind him, the hills roll north toward the Golan. Below him, close enough to see, is Capernaum, the fishing village that had become his base of operations, with its black basalt houses and its little synagogue and its harbor full of boats, with their nets spread out to dry. The air smells of water and dust and wild mustard. It is early, the heat has not yet come, and the people keep arriving. Matthew tells us where they came from, and the list is astonishing. They came from Galilee, which we would expect, but they also came from the Decapolis, the 10 Greek cities east of the Jordan, which means Gentiles were in that crowd. They came from Jerusalem, 90 miles to the south, a journey of 3 or 4 days on foot. They came from Judea and from beyond the Jordan, and from the region of Tyre and Sidon, up on the Phoenician coast. Word had traveled. He had been healing people. He had been teaching in synagogues in a way that made people walk out into the street afterward, asking each other what exactly they had just heard. So they came. Farmers with dirt under their fingernails. Fishermen who had worked all night and had not yet slept. Mothers with children on their hips and older children clutching at their clothes. Tax collectors standing at the edges where nobody would have to acknowledge them. Old men who had been waiting their entire lives for God to say something new. Sick people who had been carried there on stretchers by relatives who were exhausted and out of money and out of options. Roman-occupied, heavily taxed, religiously exhausted, politically humiliated people. People who had been told their whole lives exactly what God required of them, and had never once managed to feel that they had delivered it. And he looked at all of them, and he went up the mountain, and he sat down. That posture matters enormously, and almost nobody notices it. In the first century Jewish world, a rabbi stood up to read the scripture and sat down to teach it. Standing was for reading. Sitting was for authority. When a teacher sat, it meant, what follows is not commentary, not speculation, not one opinion among many. What follows is the ruling. To this day, the official teaching position of a professor is called a chair, and the reason is this ancient practice. So when Matthew records the small physical detail that Jesus sat down on that hillside, he is telling his readers something with enormous weight behind it. He is telling them, this is not a devotional talk. This is the King, seated, delivering the constitution of his kingdom. And then Matthew adds a phrase that is almost redundant in English, but is a formal Hebrew idiom of great solemnity. He opened his mouth and taught them, saying. In the Hebrew scriptures, that phrase precedes speech of unusual gravity. It is the verbal equivalent of a drum roll. Something is coming that you must not miss. What came next was roughly 3 chapters of Matthew's Gospel, about 2,300 words in English, a talk you could deliver aloud in something like 20 minutes, and 2,000 years of human civilization have not caught up with it. Here is the thing that has to be said before we go a single step further, because it changes everything about how you will hear what follows. Almost every person who has ever encountered the Sermon on the Mount has misread it in one of 2 directions, and both misreadings will rob you of it entirely. The first misreading is to treat it as a checklist, as a higher, harder, more demanding set of rules than the ones that came before, handed down to make you try harder and feel worse. Read that way. The Sermon on the Mount is the most crushing document ever produced, because nobody has ever kept it. Nobody. Not for one full day. If it is a ladder, every rung breaks. The second misreading is to treat it as beautiful poetry that nobody is actually expected to live. To admire it the way you admire a painting in a museum, from a respectful distance, behind a velvet rope, without any expectation that it will follow you home. Read that way. The Sermon on the Mount becomes harmless, inspiring, and inert. Both readings miss what is actually happening on that hillside. Jesus is not handing out a checklist, and he is not reciting poetry. He is doing something far stranger and far better than either. He is describing what a human life looks like when the reign of God has actually broken into it. He is not saying, "Become like this, and God will accept you." He is saying, when God gets hold of a person, this is what starts to happen to them. He is not measuring you. He is describing you, the you that you have not fully become yet, the you that is already being formed in you by a power that is not your own. That is why the whole thing opens not with a command, but with a blessing. Not with "do this," but with "blessed are." Grace speaks first. Grace always speaks first. The imperatives come later, and they come to people who have already been called blessed. So set down, if you can, whatever you have been carrying about this text. If you grew up being taught it as a burden, set that down. If you have been avoiding it, because you already know you fall short of it, set that down. If you have heard it 100 times, and it has gone flat and familiar and stopped saying anything to you at all, set that down, too. We are going to walk through all of it. The Beatitudes, salt and light, the 6 great reframings of the law, the teaching on prayer and giving and fasting, the treasure and the eye and the 2 masters, the birds and the lilies, the log and the speck, ask and seek and knock, the narrow gate, the 2 trees, the 2 builders, slowly, unhurriedly, in order, the way it was delivered. And we are going to go into the original language where it opens something up, and into the 1st century world where the context changes the meaning entirely. This is not going to be a summary. Summaries are how this sermon gets neutralized. This is going to be a walk through the whole hillside, at the pace of someone who has nowhere else to be. Before we take the first step, one small thing, and then we will not interrupt again. If this teaching reaches you today, if something in it lands somewhere that needed it, would you tap the like button just below this video? That is the only thing I am going to ask you for. It's free. It takes 1 tap, and here is what it actually does. It is not about an algorithm. It is about a person you will never meet. Somewhere tonight, there is someone lying awake with a weight on their chest they cannot name, and at 2 in the morning, They're going to go looking for something, anything that speaks to it. Every, like on this video, is one more thread pulling it toward them. Your single tap becomes a quiet gift handed to a stranger in the dark. That's all it is. Thumbs up just below the video, and it's done. And while you're there, do one more thing for me. Leave a single word in the comments, just one, for what you are carrying into this teaching today. Not an explanation, not a paragraph. One word for the weight you are hoping to set down before the end. Grief, debt, waiting, shame, whatever it is. You will be surprised what happens when a few thousand people are that honest in the same place at the same time. Now, up the hill. Let's begin where he began. Teaching 1. Blessed, the word that broke every assumption in the crowd. And, seeing the multitudes, he went up into a mountain. And when he was set, his disciples came unto him. And he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 5:1-3. The first word out of his mouth was blessed. The Greek word is makarios, and it is one of the most misunderstood words in the New Testament, largely because English does not have a good equivalent. Some translations render it happy, which is far too thin. Happy is a mood, and moods are weather. Some render it fortunate, which sounds like luck. Neither is right. Makarios in the ancient Greek world originally described the state of the gods. It was the word for a condition of blessedness that was completely untouchable by external circumstance, unreachable by loss, immune to the accidents of fortune. It described a settled, deep, permanent well-being that did not rise and fall with the news. And Jesus takes this word, a word used to describe the untouchable serenity of the divine, and applies it to a crowd of anxious, occupied, indebted, grieving Galilean peasants sitting on a hillside. That alone should stop us. But then, look at who he says it about, because this is where the crowd would have felt the ground move under them. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Every religious framework the people on that hillside had ever encountered told them the opposite. Blessedness was for the observant, for the ritually clean, for the ones who knew the law and kept it, and could demonstrate that they kept it, for the strong, the successful, the capable, the impressive. If you were poor, if you were sick, if your life had gone badly, the prevailing theology of the day quietly suggested that you had probably earned it somehow, and the Greco-Roman world layered its own version on top. Blessedness belonged to the powerful, the wealthy, the beautiful, the free. And Jesus opens his mouth and says, the untouchable, godlike well-being belongs to the poor in spirit. The Greek here is worth pausing on, because Greek had two words for poor, and he chose the harder one. There was pines, which described a working poor person, someone who had to labor for their bread but who got by. And there was tokos, which comes from a verb meaning to crouch or cower, and it described a person with absolutely nothing. A beggar. Someone whose survival depended entirely on what someone else chose to place in their hand. Jesus chose tokos. Poor in spirit, then, does not mean sad. It does not mean low self-esteem. It does not mean thinking badly of yourself. It means arriving at the honest end of your own resources. It means the person who has stopped presenting a case for themselves, who has stopped assembling the argument for why they deserve consideration, who stands before God with empty hands and no leverage and no achievements held out for inspection, and simply says, I have nothing. I need everything. And Jesus says, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Notice the tense. Every other beatitude that follows uses the future. They shall be comforted. They shall inherit. They shall be filled. This one is present. Theirs is right now, not later, not eventually, not after sufficient improvement. The moment a person genuinely arrives at empty-handedness before God, the kingdom is already theirs, which tells you the entrance requirement for the kingdom of God, and it is the strangest entrance requirement in the history of religion. The requirement is to have nothing to offer. The one thing that disqualifies you is the belief that you qualify. Think of it this way. Imagine a man who has been drowning for a long time, and someone throws him a rope. As long as he is still holding on to the piece of driftwood he found, as long as he believes the driftwood might yet save him, he cannot take the rope, because his hands are full. He does not need to become a better swimmer to be rescued. He needs to let go of the wood. That is all poor in spirit means. It is the letting go. It is the open hand. And if you are watching this in a season where you have run out, where the strategies have stopped working, where the strength you were relying on has given out, where you are more aware of your own inadequacy than you have been in years, hear this carefully. That is not the disqualification you think it is. In the economy of the kingdom of God, that is the doorway. You are standing closer to it right now than you have ever stood. Teaching. 2. Blessed are they that mourn, the comfort that only grief can receive. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Matthew 5:4. This is one of those verses that people quote at funerals, and it does belong at funerals, and it has carried an incalculable amount of weight for grieving people across 2,000 years. But if we leave it only at funerals, we will miss most of what it is doing in this particular sermon. The Greek word for mourn here is pentheo, and it is the strongest word for grief in the Greek language. It is the word used for the grief of mourning the dead. It is not disappointment. It is not sadness. It is the kind of sorrow that cannot be hidden, that shows on the face and in the body, that a person cannot politely conceal at a dinner party. And it follows immediately after poor in spirit, which is not an accident. The order of the Beatitudes is not random. They build. The first beatitude is the recognition. I have nothing. The second is the emotional weight of that recognition landing, to see yourself honestly, to see the gap between the person you are and the person you were made to be, to see the harm you have caused and the good you have withheld and the love you have failed to give, and to feel the actual grief of it, not the performance of guilt, but the real sorrow of it. That is mourning. In this sense, it is what happens when self-knowledge stops being an idea and becomes a feeling. This is a hard word for the culture we live in, because we have built an entire civilization around the avoidance of exactly this. We have more distraction available than any generation in history. If a difficult feeling begins to rise, there is a screen within arm's reach that will make it go away for another hour. We have gotten extraordinarily good at not feeling things, and Jesus sits on that hillside and says, "Blessed are the ones who let themselves feel it," because here is what he says next. They shall be comforted. The Greek is parakaleo, the same root as parakletos, the word Jesus later uses for the Holy Spirit. It means to be called alongside, to have someone come and stand next to you in it. It is not the comfort of distraction, where the feeling is covered over. It is the comfort of company, where someone comes and sits down in the middle of it with you and does not leave. And notice, the promise is in the passive voice. They shall be comforted. Not, they shall comfort themselves. Not, they shall get over it. Someone does the comforting. This is a promise about the character and the behavior of God. There is a hard mercy hidden in this beatitude, and it is this: the comfort of God is not available to the person who will not admit they need comforting, not because God withholds it, but because there is nowhere for it to land. A man who insists he is fine cannot be comforted. He has sealed the entrance. The grief is not the obstacle to the comfort. The grief is the opening through which the comfort arrives. And this applies as much to the grief that came to you from outside as to the grief you brought on yourself. If you have lost someone, if you are watching a marriage come apart, if you are grieving a version of your life that you thought you would be living by now and are not, if you are carrying a sorrow that other people have gotten tired of hearing about, that grief is not evidence that God has overlooked you. It is precisely the place where He has promised, in His own words, on a Galilean hillside, to come and sit down beside you. The comfort is not a technique. It is a person, and He has already committed Himself in advance to those who mourn. Teaching 3. Blessed are the meek, the most misunderstood word in the sermon. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Matthew 5:5. No word in this entire sermon has been more damaged by translation than this one. Say meek in English today, and people hear weak. They hear timid. They hear a person who will not stand up for themselves, who apologizes for existing, who gets walked over in meetings, and never says what they actually think. That is not remotely what the word means. The Greek is praus, and its background is military and agricultural, not psychological. Praus was the standard word used for a war horse that had been broken to the bridle. Sit with that image for a moment, because it changes everything. A war horse is not a weak animal. It is one of the most powerful things on a first-century battlefield. A half-ton of muscle capable of trampling a man into the ground. A horse that has been made praus has lost none of that power, not 1 ounce of it. What it has gained is the ability to receive direction. It will now stand still in the middle of chaos. It will now advance when told, and hold when told, and turn when told. Its enormous strength has come under the control of a will other than its own, and precisely because of that, it has become useful for something far greater than it could ever have accomplished on its own. Meekness, in the biblical sense, is power under control. It is strength that has been placed at the disposal of God, which explains something that would otherwise be very strange. Moses is described in Numbers as the meekest man on the face of the earth, the same Moses who confronted the most powerful ruler in the ancient world to his face and did not blink. And Jesus describes himself as meek and lowly in heart. The same Jesus who braided a whip and drove the money changers out of the temple courts. Neither of those men was timid. Both of them were absolutely under orders. Now look at the promise, because it is deliberately provocative. They shall inherit the earth. Everyone in that crowd understood how the earth is normally acquired. Rome had shown them. You acquire the earth with legions, with siege engines, with taxation and crucifixion, and the systematic demonstration that resistance is fatal. The strong take the ground. That is simply how the world works, and it had worked that way for the entire span of human memory. And Jesus says, no. In the long run, the ground goes to the meek. Note the verb, too. Inherit. Not seize, not conquer, not earn. An inheritance is something you receive because of your relationship to the one giving it. You do not fight for an inheritance. You are given it because of whose child you are. There is a quiet, almost humorous vindication buried in this beatitude for anyone who has ever watched someone else get ahead by being ruthless. The aggressive person appears to be winning, and often is, for a while. But the aggressive person has to hold everything by force, which means the holding never ends and the grip never relaxes. The meek person is not gripping anything, because the meek person has already handed the whole matter over to someone else. And in the end, when the accounts are settled and the kingdom comes in its fullness, it turns out that the ones who were not fighting for the ground are the ones who are given it. If you are in a situation right now where holding back feels like losing, where you could win the argument, could return the insult, could pull the lever you know how to pull, and are choosing not to because you sense that the choosing not to is somehow the more Christ-like path, understand what you are doing. You are not losing. You are behaving like an heir. Teaching 4. Hunger and thirst, the only appetite. God guarantees to satisfy. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Matthew 5:6. To understand what this sentence did to the people who first heard it, you have to understand that they were not using hunger as a metaphor. In first-century Galilee, under Roman taxation layered on top of temple taxation, layered on top of tenant farming, real hunger was a normal feature of ordinary life. Many people in that crowd would have known what it was to eat less than they needed for a week at a stretch. And thirst, in a semi-arid climate where water had to be carried, was not an abstraction either. When Jesus uses these two words, he is not reaching for a poetic image. He is reaching for the most physically insistent experience his listeners knew, and the Greek makes it more intense still. In ordinary Greek grammar, verbs of hungering and thirsting take the partitive genitive. You hunger for some of the bread, some of the water. Jesus uses the accusative. Grammatically, he is describing a person who hungers for the whole loaf, who thirsts for the entire supply. Not a taste of righteousness. All of it. So the picture is of a desire that is total, physical, insistent, and impossible to ignore or negotiate with. Hunger is not a preference. You cannot decide to stop being hungry. It rises on its own schedule, and it does not go away because you are busy. What is being described here is a person who wants to be right with God and to see things put right in the world the way a starving person wants food. That word righteousness, dikaiosune, carries both dimensions, and English tends to flatten it to one. It means personal rightness with God, yes. But in the Hebrew world behind the Greek, it also means justice, things being set right, the crooked made straight, the oppressed lifted, the wrong undone. To hunger and thirst for righteousness is to want both, to want to be made right, and to want the world to be made right, with the same physical urgency. And here is the promise: they shall be filled. The Greek word is chortazo, and it is not a delicate word. It was originally used for feeding livestock, for an animal eating until it stops, satisfied, full, not sampled, not nibbled, filled to capacity. This is, in a real sense, the only appetite in existence that comes with a guarantee attached. Every other hunger a human being has ever had eventually disappoints. The hunger for achievement is satisfied, and then, within weeks, the bar moves and you are hungry again. The hunger for recognition is fed, and the feeling of it evaporates faster than you expected. The hunger for security is met, and reveals a new insecurity behind it. This is not cynicism. It is simply the observed experience of nearly everyone who has ever gotten what they wanted. The thing arrives, and the hunger does not leave. Jesus says there is exactly one hunger that terminates in fullness, rather than in a receding horizon, and it is the hunger for God's own rightness. There is also enormous encouragement here for people who feel their spiritual life consists mostly of wanting and not much of having. He does not say, "Blessed are the righteous." He says, "Blessed are the ones who are hungry for it." The hunger itself is the blessed condition. If you are watching this, and your primary spiritual experience right now is a kind of ache, a sense that you want to be closer to God than you are, that you want to be a better person than you are managing to be, that you want the world to be less broken than it is, and that all of that wanting has not yet resolved into arriving, you are not outside this verse. You are the exact person it was spoken about. The wanting is the sign of life, and the fullness is promised on His word to everyone who has it. Teaching 5. Merciful, pure, and peacemaking. 3 portraits of a kingdom heart. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Matthew 5:7-9. Something shifts at this point in the Beatitudes, and it is worth naming. The first 4 described a person's condition: poor, mourning, meek, hungry. They are about what you are and what you lack. The next 3 describe what a person does: showing mercy, keeping the heart clean, making peace. They are outward. The kingdom has come into the person in the first 4, and in the next 3 it begins to come out of them. This is the pattern of the entire Christian life in miniature. Nothing goes out that did not first come in. Blessed are the merciful. The Greek layman describes not merely a feeling of pity, but active compassion, mercy that does something. And the Hebrew concept behind it, chesed, means getting so far inside another person's situation that you see with their eyes and feel with their feelings, and then act from there. Mercy is not sympathy at a distance. It is entering in, and the promise is a mirror. They shall obtain mercy. This is not a transaction where you earn God's mercy by being merciful. Jesus is describing something about the nature of the human heart. A person who has genuinely received mercy becomes merciful, and a person who cannot extend mercy has almost certainly not yet understood what they have been forgiven. The hard heart toward others is a symptom, not a cause. Mercy flows through people. It does not pool in them. If it is not coming out, it is worth asking honestly whether it has yet gone all the way in. Blessed are the pure in heart. The word katharos means unmixed, unalloyed, without contamination. It was used of metal that had been refined until nothing was left but the metal itself, and of grain that had been winnowed until only grain remained. Purity of heart, then, is not primarily about moral flawlessness. It is about singleness. It is the absence of a double motive. It is doing the good thing for the reason you say you are doing it. And this is convicting in a way that surface morality is not, because most of us can manage the right action far more easily than we can manage the right action with an entirely clean motive underneath it. We give and enjoy being seen giving. We serve and want it noticed. We forgive and mention it later. The action is right, and the metal is mixed, and they shall see God. There is a principle in Scripture that you see with what you are. The impure heart cannot see God clearly, not because God is hiding, but because the lens is streaked. As the heart becomes single, the vision clears. Blessed are the peacemakers. Note carefully, not peacekeepers, and not the peaceful. Irenopoios is an active, constructive word. One who makes peace, who builds it where it did not exist. Peacekeeping is the avoidance of conflict. It is the strategy of never raising the difficult subject, of smoothing things over, of letting a wound go untreated because treating it would be uncomfortable. Peacemaking is almost the opposite. It walks into the conflict. It says the hard thing. It absorbs cost. It is the person who goes to the estranged brother, who makes the phone call they have been dreading for 3 years, who steps between two parties and takes the friction of both. And the reason peacemakers are called the children of God is that this is precisely what God did. He did not keep the peace by ignoring the breach between himself and the human race. He made peace at enormous cost by entering the conflict himself and absorbing it in his own body on a cross. Everyone who makes peace is doing a small, recognizable version of what the Father did on a global scale. The family resemblance is unmistakable. That is why they get the family name. Teaching. Blessed are the persecuted, the beatitude nobody wants. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely, for my sake. Rejoice, and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven. Matthew 5:10-12. The Beatitudes end where nobody would have chosen to end them. Notice first that this is the only one Jesus expands. The others get a single line each. This one gets 3 verses, and in the middle of it, the grammar changes. Up to this point, he has been speaking in the third person. Blessed are they. Here he turns and speaks directly. Blessed are ye. It stops being a description and becomes a warning, delivered face to face to the people in front of him, about what following him is going to cost. And notice the qualifier, which is doing a great deal of work, for righteousness' sake, and a verse later, for my sake. Jesus is not blessing every form of being disliked. There is no promise here for the person who is treated badly because they were obnoxious, or self-righteous, or difficult, or because they mistook rudeness for conviction. The blessing attaches to opposition incurred for the sake of goodness itself, and for the sake of Christ himself. Which raises the honest question, why would goodness attract hostility at all? Because a life genuinely lived under the kingdom of God is a standing indictment of the arrangement everyone else has settled for. The person who cannot be bought exposes the ones who were. The person who tells the truth when it costs them makes everyone around them aware of the last time they didn't. The person who forgives someone who did not deserve it makes the grudges in the room feel suddenly heavy. Light does not have to accuse anything. Its presence is the accusation. and there is a part of the human heart that would rather extinguish the light than face what it reveals. Then comes the command that sounds almost unhinged if you take it seriously. Rejoice and be exceeding glad. The Greek agaliao is a word for leaping, exuberant, physical joy. He is not saying, grit your teeth and endure it. He is saying, celebrate. And the reason he gives is startling in its casualness. For so persecuted they the prophets which were before you. Sit with what that means. He is saying that mistreatment for the sake of God places you in a specific historical line. Isaiah, Jeremiah thrown in a cistern, Daniel, Elijah running for his life. He is telling a crowd of ordinary Galilean laborers that if they are opposed for his sake, they should understand themselves as standing in the company of the prophets of Israel. Most people watching this are not facing violent persecution, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. But many are facing the quieter forms, the family that has grown cold since you came to faith, the workplace where your convictions have made you the one who is quietly not invited, the friendships that thinned when you stopped participating in things you used to participate in, the relative who brings it up at every gathering with a certain edge. That is real, and it is lonely, and it is exactly what this beatitude was spoken over. You are not being punished for getting it wrong. There is a strong possibility you are being resisted for getting it right. Teaching 7. Salt and light. What he called you before he told you anything to do. Ye are the salt of the earth. Ye are the light of the world. A city that is set on an hill cannot be hid. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. Matthew chapter 5, 13-16. Here is where the sermon turns from what the kingdom does to a person to what that person then is in the world. And the two images Jesus chooses are not accidental. They are almost opposites, and together they describe the entire posture of a life lived under God. Look first at the verb. He does not say, become the salt of the earth. He does not say, try to be light. He says, ye are. It is an indicative, not an imperative. He is not assigning a target. He is announcing an identity that has already been conferred. This ordering matters more than almost anything else in the sermon. Everything Jesus commands from this point forward is addressed to people he has already called salt and light. The identity precedes the instruction. You do not become a child of God by behaving like one. You behave like one because you have been made one. Every religious system in human history runs the other direction, do, in order to become. Jesus runs it the only way that actually produces change. You are, therefore, live like it. Now, the images themselves. Salt in the ancient world was extraordinarily valuable. Roman soldiers were sometimes paid in it, which is where the word salary comes from. And it did two things. It preserved and it seasoned. Before refrigeration, salt was the only thing standing between a piece of meat and rot. It was rubbed in, buried in the flesh, invisible, and it stopped decay. That is the first half of a Christian's function in the world, and it is almost entirely hidden work. It is the presence that keeps a workplace from becoming quite as cynical as it wanted to be. The colleague whose integrity means a certain conversation does not happen when they are in the room. The neighbor whose steadiness slows the decay on a street. Nobody applauds salt. Salt works buried. But salt also seasons. It makes things taste like themselves. A Christian who preserves without seasoning becomes a scold. The salt Jesus describes is not only what stops rot, but what makes life vivid, what makes goodness attractive rather than merely obligatory. And then the warning, "If the salt have lost his savor, wherewith shall it be salted?" Salt in the ancient world was often gathered impure, mixed with sand and gypsum from the Dead Sea flats. Over time, the actual sodium chloride could leach out, leaving a white powder that looked exactly like salt, and did nothing. It was, Jesus says, good for nothing but to be trodden underfoot. Literally, it was thrown onto the packed dirt paths. The danger he names is not that a believer becomes obviously bad. It is that a believer becomes indistinguishable, still looks like salt, does not do anything anymore. Light is the opposite kind of work. Salt is hidden. Light cannot be. A city that is set on an hill cannot be hid. Anyone who has walked the hills of Galilee at night knows the image. The villages sat on ridgelines, their lamps visible for miles across the dark valleys. Nobody has to advertise a city on a hill. It simply is what it is, and it is seen. So the two images balance each other perfectly. Salt says, your influence will often be invisible, buried, unthanked, and it will still be doing the most important work you do. Light says, some of it will be entirely visible, whether you like it or not. So live accordingly. And look at the last clause, because it is the safeguard against everything this could become, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. The visibility is not for you. A lamp that draws attention to itself has stopped functioning as a lamp. The point of light is never the lamp. The point of light is what becomes visible because of it. Teaching 8. I am not come to destroy, the key that unlocks the whole sermon. Think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. Except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, ye shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 5:17-20. If you understand this passage, the rest of the sermon opens. If you miss it, everything that follows will be misread. The crowd had a legitimate question forming. This man was doing things that looked like a departure. He was touching lepers, which was ritually unthinkable. He was speaking with Samaritans. He was eating in the houses of tax collectors. He was healing on the Sabbath and refusing to apologize for it. A reasonable person in that crowd would be wondering whether he was proposing to dismantle the entire structure of the law. So he addresses it directly, and the word he chooses is enormous. The Greek plerou means to fill up, to fill something to its intended capacity, to bring it to its full and complete expression. He is not saying he came to keep the law, though he did. He is not saying he came to replace it. He is saying he came to fill it full, to bring out of it everything that was always in it, everything it was pointing toward and could never quite reach on its own. Think of a musical score. A page of written notation is not the music. It is the true and accurate record of the music, but it is silent on the page. It is waiting for someone capable of playing it. When a great performer sits down and plays it, the score has not been abolished. It has not been altered by a single note. It has been fulfilled, brought from potential into sound, from ink into something you can weep at. That is what Jesus is claiming to be doing with the entire Hebrew Scripture. Not tearing up the score, playing it. And then verse 20, which would have landed on that hillside like a stone. Except Your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees. Ye shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. We hear Pharisee as an insult because of how the Gospels end. The crowd did not. To that crowd, the Pharisees were the most serious, most disciplined, most admirable religious people they had ever encountered. These were men who tithed their kitchen herbs, who fasted twice a week, who had built an entire secondary structure of 613 precise obligations around the law in order to make absolutely certain they never accidentally broke it. So when Jesus says your righteousness must exceed theirs, the immediate reaction in that crowd would have been despair. Exceed them? Nobody exceeds them. That is the ceiling. But he does not say your righteousness must be greater in quantity. He is not asking for more fasting than the Pharisees, more tithing, more scrupulous rule-keeping. He is describing a righteousness of a different kind altogether. Theirs was external, measurable, and performed. What he is about to describe for the next 2 chapters lies underneath the behavior, in the anger before the murder, in the look before the adultery, in the motive underneath the giving. And this is the mercy hidden in what sounds like an impossible demand. A righteousness of degree can never be achieved. You can always find someone more scrupulous, and the bar recedes forever. A righteousness of kind cannot be manufactured at all, which means it has to be given. Jesus is not raising the ladder. He is telling the crowd that no ladder reaches, and that the only way in is a righteousness that comes from somewhere other than their own effort. Everything that follows, the 6 great reframings, the 6 times he says ye have heard that it was said, but I say unto you, is the unpacking of this one verse. He is not making the law harder. He is showing them where it always lived. Teaching 9. But I say unto you, anger, and the root. Beneath the act, ye have heard that it was said by them of old time, Thou shalt not kill. But I say unto you, that whosoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. Matthew 5:21-22. Now the pattern begins, and it repeats 6 times. Ye have heard that it was said, but I say unto you. 6 times he takes a commandment everyone in the crowd had known since childhood and drives it inward, past the behavior, into the place where the behavior is manufactured. He begins with murder because it is the one everyone in the audience can safely feel innocent of. That is the genius of the sequence. Nobody on that hillside had killed anyone. Every head in that crowd could nod along comfortably. Thou shalt not kill. Yes, absolutely. And I haven't. And then, in a single sentence, he demolishes the comfort. But I say unto you, that whosoever is angry with his brother is in danger of the judgment. He is not equating anger with murder in terms of consequence. He is identifying anger as the same substance in an earlier stage. Murder is what anger becomes when it is fed long enough and the circumstances allow it. The seed and the tree are the same organism at different points in time. And God, Jesus says, is not merely interested in the tree. He is dealing with the soil. He then gives 2 specific escalations, and they are worth knowing. Raka was an Aramaic term of contempt, something close to empty-head, worthless one. It is the word of dismissal, the word that reduces a person to nothing. And thou fool, the Greek is moros, from which we get moron, was a step further, a denial of a person's worth at the level of their character. What these 2 words have in common is that neither of them is violence. Both of them are erasure. They are the verbal act of removing someone's humanity from the ledger. And Jesus places that act on the same continuum as killing, because in a real sense, it is the same intention with less follow-through. Then he does something structurally remarkable. Having taken the commandment inward, he immediately drives it back outward into action, and the action is startling. Therefore, if thou bring thy gift to the altar, and there rememberest that thy brother hath aught against thee, leave there thy gift before the altar, and go thy way. First be reconciled to thy brother, and then come and offer thy gift. Picture what he is describing. A man has traveled, possibly for days, to Jerusalem. He has brought an animal. He is standing in the temple court with the smoke rising and the priests working and his offering in his hands at the single most sacred moment available to a first-century Jew. And Jesus says, if you remember, standing right there, that someone has something against you, put the animal down and walk out. Leave the worship. Go fix the relationship. Come back afterward. Note the direction, too, because it is the harder one. He does not say if you have something against your brother. He says if your brother has something against you. This is not about the person who wronged you. This is about the person you wronged, which means the responsibility to initiate falls on you, even when you are the one at fault, and especially then. The implication is one of the most challenging in the entire New Testament. God would rather have you reconciled with the person you have hurt than have your worship. Vertical devotion offered while horizontal relationships lie in ruins is, in his assessment, not acceptable worship. It is a performance conducted over a wound that everyone has agreed not to look at. There is almost certainly a name that came into your mind in the last 30 seconds. That is not an accident. That is the verse doing exactly what it was designed to do. Teaching 10. The look and the inner gate. Purity as an interior matter. Ye have heard that it was said by them of old time, Thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you, that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. Matthew 5:27-28. The second reframing follows the identical logic, applied to a different commandment, and it will be misunderstood unless the Greek is handled carefully. The word translated looketh is a present participle indicating continuous, deliberate action, and it is coupled with a purpose clause, to lust after her. Jesus is not condemning the involuntary. He is not saying that noticing another human being is beautiful constitutes sin. That would make sin out of the ordinary functioning of human eyes, and it would place an unbearable weight on people who are already crushed. The construction describes something else entirely, the deliberate continuation of a look for the purpose of feeding a desire. It is the difference between a thought arriving and a thought being invited to stay. The Greek word for lust here, epithymia, means over-desire, desire that has slipped its proper boundaries, and the object of that over-desire is a person. That is the heart of what is being named. The sin is not desire itself. Desire is God's invention and God's gift. The sin is the reduction of a human being made in the image of God into an object that exists for the purpose of my consumption. It is the moment a someone becomes a something. Then come the two most violent sentences Jesus ever spoke about the body. If thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out. If thy right hand offend thee, cut it off. This is hyperbole, and every serious reader across 2,000 years has understood it as hyperbole, including because a blind man can still lust and a one-handed man can still sin. Jesus is not prescribing mutilation. He is prescribing seriousness. And the point of the hyperbole is precisely that we do not treat this seriously. The instinct of the human heart with the besetting sin is to manage it, to reduce it, to keep it at a level that feels survivable and does not require anything drastic. Jesus is saying that instinct is the trap. What is required is not management, but amputation. The decisive removal of the access point, whatever it costs, however inconvenient, however much it feels like an overreaction to everyone around you. For the person watching this who knows exactly what their access point is, the app, the account, the hour of the night when it always happens, the friendship that is not what it is being called, this is the verse that gives you permission to be extreme about it. You are not overreacting. Jesus was more extreme about it than you have ever been willing to be. And underneath the severity, there is something worth naming clearly, because this passage has been used as a bludgeon far too often. The reason Jesus guards the interior life this fiercely is not that he is squeamish about human desire. It is that he knows what it costs a person to live divided, to be one thing in public and another in private, to carry a secret that has to be continually managed, to have an interior life that would humiliate you if it were visible. He is not protecting his standards. He is protecting your integrity in the literal sense of the word, your wholeness, your being one person all the way through. Teaching 11. Let your yes be yes, the weight of a word. Again, ye have heard that it hath been said by them of old time, Thou shalt not forswear thyself. But let your communication be, Yea, yea, nay, nay, for whatsoever is more than these cometh of evil. Matthew 5:33-37. By the 1st century, the practice of swearing oaths had developed into something close to a technical art form, and the art form had a purpose: to create graded levels of obligation so that a person could sound binding without actually being bound. The system worked like this. An oath sworn by the name of God was absolutely binding. Nobody would risk that. So, an elaborate secondary vocabulary developed. You could swear by heaven, by the earth, by Jerusalem, by the temple, by the gold of the temple, by your own head, and there were rabbinic debates, recorded and preserved, about which of these were binding and which could be quietly set aside afterward. Swearing by the temple, some held, was not binding, but swearing by the gold of the temple was. What that means in practice is that the entire apparatus existed so that a person could speak in a way that sounded solemn to the listener while leaving themselves an exit. It was a machinery of legalized insincerity, and everyone in that culture knew how to read it, which meant the whole society ran on a background assumption that people's words were graded, and that you had to listen carefully to find out how much of what was being said was real. Jesus dismantles the entire structure in 3 sentences, and the way he does it is beautiful. He points out that every escape clause fails on inspection. Swear by heaven, it is God's throne. The earth, it is his footstool. Jerusalem, it is the city of the great king, your own head. You cannot make a single hair white or black. You do not even own your own head. There is nothing in existence that does not ultimately belong to God, which means there is no such thing as an oath that does not implicate him. Every attempt to swear by something lesser is a fiction, because nothing is finally lesser. And then the conclusion, let your yea be yea, and your nay, nay. He is describing a kind of person for whom oaths are structurally unnecessary, if your word is simply reliable, if the thing you say is the thing you will do, without gradation, without escalation, without a system of intensifiers, then you never need to swear to anything, because there is no gap between your ordinary speech and your solemn speech. There is only one register, and it is true. This is, quietly, one of the most practical and most testing teachings in the whole sermon, because almost all of us live with a version of the graded system. We have our word, and then we have our word. We say we'll get to it, meaning probably not. We say we'll pray about it, meaning we would like to end this conversation. We say we'll be there in 10 minutes from a driveway we have not yet left. None of it feels like lying, because everyone involved understands the convention. Jesus is asking for something almost startling in its simplicity. Be a person whose sentences are true, whose yes can be built on, whose commitments do not need to be checked. It is the kind of integrity that takes years to build and one conversation to spend, and it is one of the most powerful forms of witness available to a human being, because in a world that runs on graded speech, a person who simply means what they say is genuinely strange. Teaching. 12. Turn the other cheek. What he was actually describing. Ye have heard that it hath been said, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you, that ye resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also. Matthew 5:38-39. This is one of the most misused verses in the Bible, and the misuse has done real harm, so let us be careful and let us be precise. First, understand what an eye for an eye actually was. Modern ears hear it as savage. In its original context, it was the opposite. It was a limitation on vengeance. In the ancient Near East, the natural human pattern was escalation. You take my eye, my clan takes your life, and burns your village. The law of proportional response, the lex talionis, was a legal ceiling. It said the response may not exceed the injury. It was one of the great civilizing achievements of ancient jurisprudence, and it was designed to be administered by courts, not by individuals in the heat of the moment. By the 1st century, it had been widely repurposed as a personal entitlement, as a justification for getting your own back. And that is what Jesus is addressing. Now the details, because the details change everything. He specifies the right cheek. Consider the mechanics. For a right-handed person, and in that culture, the left hand was not used for social contact at all. Striking someone's right cheek requires a backhanded blow. And in the 1st century Near East, the backhand was not primarily how you injured someone. It was how you insulted an inferior. A master backhanded a servant. A Roman backhanded a Jew. A man backhanded someone he considered beneath him. There were even legal codes assigning a heavier fine for a backhand than an open-fisted blow, precisely because the injury was to dignity rather than to the body. So what is Jesus describing? He is describing a humiliation, not an assault. And what does turning the other cheek actually do? It presents the left cheek, which cannot be backhanded by the right hand. To strike it, the aggressor must use an open palm or a fist, which in that culture was how you struck an equal. The person who turns the other cheek has not fought back, has not fled, and has not submitted. They have done something far more disarming. They have quietly refused to accept the definition of themselves that the blow was meant to impose. The Greek word for resist here, antistonai, is worth noting as well. It is frequently a military term, to take up an opposing position, to counterattack in kind. Jesus is not commanding passivity in the face of evil. He is forbidding the mirror. He is forbidding the response that adopts the tactics of the aggressor, and thereby hands him the victory of having made you into a version of himself. The same logic runs through the two examples that follow. If a man sues you for your coat, give him your cloak also. In a culture where the outer cloak was legally protected as a poor man's blanket, and where handing over both would leave the debtor standing naked in court, exposing the brutality of the whole proceeding to everyone present. If a Roman soldier compels you to carry his pack 1 mile, a legal right of the occupying army, strictly capped at 1 mile, carry it 2, and watch the soldier become the one who is anxious, because he is now the one breaking the regulation. These are not the instructions of a doormat. They are the instructions of a person who has refused both violence and passivity, and found the third thing, a response so unexpected that it breaks the machinery of the exchange. And underneath all of it is the single idea that runs through the whole sermon. Evil perpetuates itself by reproduction. It survives by making its victims into its next generation. The only way the cycle stops is when someone absorbs it and refuses to pass it on, which is, of course, precisely what Jesus was going to do himself 3 years later on a Roman cross. Teaching 13. Love your enemies, the command that has no parallel. Ye have heard that it hath been said, Thou shalt love thy neighbor, and hate thine enemy. But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you. Matthew 5:43-44. Search the religious and philosophical literature of the ancient world, and you will find many good things. You will find the golden rule in negative form in several traditions. You will find calls to justice, to moderation, to compassion for the poor, to hospitality toward strangers. What you will not find anywhere in this form is this: love your enemies is without parallel. It is the single most original sentence in the moral history of the world. And notice how he begins, because it is precise. He quotes the command to love your neighbor, which is in the law, Leviticus 19, and then adds, and hate thine enemy, which is not in the law anywhere. It had accreted. It was the implication people had drawn from the boundary of the command. If I am told to love my neighbor, then presumably there is a category outside of neighbor, and presumably I am free with regard to them. That is what human beings always do with a command that has an edge. We find the edge, and we live on it. Jesus removes the edge entirely. The word he uses is agape, and this is essential, because the objection that immediately rises in every honest heart is, I cannot manufacture a feeling of affection for someone who has damaged me. And that objection is correct. You cannot and you are not being asked to. Greek had several words for love. Eros was desire. Philia was the warmth of friendship and mutual affection. Storge was family attachment. Agape was different from all of them. It described a determined, chosen, active commitment to the good of another person, entirely independent of whether they deserved it, and entirely independent of how you felt about them. Agape is not a feeling that produces action. It is an action that may eventually produce feeling. It is something you do, and it can be done through gritted teeth on a day when you would rather not, which is exactly why it can be commanded. Nobody can be commanded to feel. Everybody can be commanded to act. And look at the 4 verbs he gives, because they are a ladder of increasing difficulty. Love them, bless them, speak well of them, refuse to run them down when their name comes up, do good to them, take actual action for their benefit, and pray for them. That last one is the hinge, and anyone who has ever attempted it knows why. It is nearly impossible to pray sincerely for a person and continue to hate them. Something happens in the act of bringing someone before God and asking for good on their behalf that begins, slowly and against your will, to dismantle the case you have been building against them. You cannot hold the resentment in the same hand as the prayer. One of the two eventually has to be put down. Then Jesus gives the reason, and the reason is the entire argument, that ye may be the children of your Father which is in heaven. For he maketh his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain on the just and on the unjust. That is an observation about the world that anyone can verify. The sunrise is not means-tested. The rain does not fall selectively on the deserving. God's ordinary, daily generosity is poured out on people who curse him and people who love him without distinction, every single day, everywhere on earth. The command to love your enemies is not an arbitrary difficulty imposed to test you. It is an invitation to behave like your Father behaves, to be, in the small territory of your own life, the same kind of indiscriminate generosity that has been keeping you alive every morning of your life. And then, the closing line of the chapter, which sounds like a crushing weight until you look at the word, "Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father, which is in heaven, is perfect." The Greek teleos does not mean flawless. It means brought to completion, mature, having arrived at the end for which the thing was made. An apple is teleos when it is ripe. A person is teleos when they have become what a person was made to be. He is not demanding moral flawlessness from a hillside of Galilean farmers. He is telling them what they were made for, and that indiscriminate love is what maturity looks like when it finally arrives. Teaching 14. The audience of 1, giving and fasting in secret. Take heed that ye do not your alms before men, to be seen of them. But when thou doest alms, let not thy left hand know what thy right hand doeth, that thine alms may be in secret, and thy Father which seeth in secret himself shall reward thee openly. Matthew 6:1-4. Chapter 6 opens a new movement in the sermon. Chapter 5 dealt with the law and the heart behind it. Chapter 6 deals with religion, with the 3 great practices of Jewish devotion: giving, praying, and fasting. And he addresses all 3 with the identical structure. When you do this, do not do it like the hypocrites. Do it in secret. Your Father sees in secret. The word hypocrite is one of the most vivid in the New Testament. Hypocrites was the ordinary Greek word for a stage actor, specifically one who performed wearing a mask, projecting his voice through the mouth hole so the back rows could hear. It was not originally an insult. It was a job title, and that is exactly the accusation. The problem is not that these people are doing bad things. Giving to the poor, praying, and fasting are 3 of the finest activities a human being can engage in. The problem is that the performance has become the point, and the mask has become the face. Notice, too, that Jesus never says, "Do not give." He says, "When thou doest alms," he assumes it. He is not reducing the practice. He is relocating the audience. "Let not thy left hand know what thy right hand doeth" is deliberately absurd, and the absurdity is the teaching. He is describing a generosity so unself-conscious that even the giver barely registers it. Not, "Give secretly and then privately enjoy the knowledge of how secretly you gave." That is simply the performance moved indoors, with an audience of one, and that one is you. The same logic applies to fasting. "When ye fast, be not, as the hypocrites, of a sad countenance, for they disfigure their faces." Some in that era would go unwashed, ungroomed, visibly haggard so the fast could be read from across the courtyard. Jesus says, "Wash your face, comb your hair, let no one know." Let the hunger be a conversation between you and God alone. And here is the promise that holds all of it together: "Thy Father, which seeth in secret." The Greek is emphatic. He himself sees. Not an angel taking notes. Not a ledger somewhere. God himself, personally attending to the thing nobody else noticed. That is the deep comfort under this passage, and it is worth hearing if you are someone who has spent years doing quiet, unglamorous, entirely unnoticed good. The visit nobody knew about. The check nobody traced. The forgiveness you extended silently and never mentioned. The years of caring for someone who could not thank you. Every one of those was seen. Not one of them fell into a void. The reason Jesus can tell you to stop needing human recognition is not that recognition does not matter. It is that you already have the only recognition that will still be standing at the end. Teaching 15. Enter into thy closet, what prayer is not, and what it is. And when thou prayest, thou shalt not be as the hypocrites are. But thou, when thou prayest, enter into thy closet. And when thou hast shut thy door, pray to thy Father which is in secret. Use not vain repetitions, as the heathen do, for they think that they shall be heard for their much speaking. Matthew 6:5-7. Before he teaches the crowd how to pray, Jesus clears away two wrong models, and both of them are still with us. The first is prayer as performance. The image is of someone timing their movements, so that the hour of prayer catches them in a public place. And the verdict Jesus gives is chilling in its brevity. They have their reward. The Greek apecho was a commercial term stamped on receipts. It meant paid in full, account settled, nothing further owed. They wanted to be seen. They were seen. Transaction complete. There is nothing else coming. The word translated closet is tamion, and it did not mean a prayer room. Ordinary Galilean houses did not have those. Tamion was the storeroom, the small, windowless inner space where grain and tools were kept, often the only room in the house with a door that shut. He is not describing a chapel. He is describing the most ordinary, unromantic, functional space available and saying, "Go in there, shut the door, and talk to your Father," which means the location of real prayer is wherever nobody can see you. A parked car, a bathroom at work, a walk, a kitchen at 5 in the morning before anyone else is up. The tamion is not a place you have to find. It is any place where the performance becomes impossible. The second wrong model is prayer as technique, vain repetitions, the Greek batalogio, meaning to stammer or babble on. He points to the pagan practice of piling up divine names and formulas on the theory that the right words in sufficient quantity would compel a response. That instinct never died. It survives every time someone worries they have not prayed correctly, or long enough, or with the right vocabulary, or with sufficient emotional intensity to make it count. And Jesus dismantles the whole anxiety with one sentence: "Your Father knoweth what things ye have need of, before ye ask him." Which raises the obvious question: if he already knows, why ask at all? Because prayer was never a system for transmitting information to God. If it were, the omniscience of God would make it pointless. Prayer is the maintenance of a relationship. A child does not tell a parent about their day because the parent lacks data. They tell them because telling is what closeness consists of. Prayer is not how God finds out. It is how you stay near. Teaching 16. Our Father, the prayer that teaches us how to pray. After this manner therefore pray ye, Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever. Amen. Matthew 6:9-13. He does not say pray these words. He says after this manner pray. This is a pattern, a shape, a set of proportions. It has been prayed word for word by more human beings than any other sentence ever composed, and it was given as a template. Look at the first two words, because everything is in them. Our Father. In the entire Hebrew Scripture, God is addressed directly as Father only a handful of times, and always corporately, Father of the nation. What Jesus does here, and what he does constantly, is address God as Father personally, and then hand that address to everyone else. The Aramaic word behind it, Abba, was ordinary family speech. It was what a child said in the house. And it is our, not my. Even alone in the storeroom with the door shut, the prayer he gives is plural. You cannot pray this prayer without acknowledging that you are one of many, that your bread is our bread, that your forgiveness is bound up with everyone else's. The most private prayer in the world begins by making you part of a family. Now watch the structure, because the order is the teaching. The first three requests are entirely about God. Hallowed be thy name. Let your character be treated as holy. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done. Not one of them mentions the person praying. Only after those three does the prayer turn to human need, which tells you something about the architecture of a healthy prayer life. It begins by getting the size of things right. Most anxiety in prayer comes from starting with the problem, because a problem examined at close range fills the entire visual field. Beginning with God does not deny the problem. It restores its actual proportions. Give us this day our daily bread. The word rendered daily is epiousios, and it is one of the great puzzles of the New Testament. It appears essentially nowhere else in surviving Greek literature. The most probable sense is bread for the coming day, which is to say, enough, not the year's supply, not security against every future. Today's portion. This is manna theology. In the wilderness, Israel gathered bread each morning and was forbidden to store it. Anything hoarded bred worms by dawn. God deliberately built a system in which his people had to come back tomorrow. That was not cruelty. It was relationship enforced by design. And Jesus puts the same principle at the center of the prayer he gives us, which means that the daily insufficiency you feel, the sense that you have enough for today, and no visible provision for the year, is not a failure of faith. It is the arrangement. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. The final request is defensive, and it is honest about something we prefer not to admit. We are not as strong as we think. Our self-knowledge is limited, and there are pressures under which we would not hold. It is the prayer of a person who has stopped overestimating themselves, which brings the whole prayer back around to where the sermon began, at poor in spirit, with empty hands. Teaching 17. As we forgive, the hardest line in the prayer. For if ye forgive men their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if ye forgive not men their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. Matthew 6:14-15. Of all the lines in the Lord's Prayer, one is different, and Jesus knew it. After the prayer ends, he goes back and comments on exactly one petition. Only one. This one. Forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. Read that slowly, because it is astonishing what we are asking for. We are requesting that God apply to us the same standard we are currently applying to the person who hurt us. We are volunteering our own conduct as the measure. It is the only petition in the prayer that contains a comparison, and it is the only one where we set the terms. Now, this is not saying that forgiveness is earned or that God's mercy is purchased by our behavior. The entire sermon has been demolishing that idea for 2 chapters. What it is saying is something about the nature of a heart that has genuinely received mercy. Unforgiveness held deliberately and permanently is evidence of a heart that has not yet let mercy through. Not because God revoked it, but because a closed hand cannot receive while it is closed. The same clenched fist that will not release is the fist that cannot take hold. And this needs saying carefully, because forgiveness is one of the most misunderstood words in the Christian vocabulary, and false definitions of it have kept people trapped for decades. Forgiveness is not saying that what happened was acceptable. It was not. Forgiveness is not the erasure of memory. You will likely remember it for the rest of your life. Forgiveness is not the restoration of trust. Trust is rebuilt slowly through changed behavior, and some relationships should not be restored at all. Forgiveness is not the removal of consequences, and it is not required to be announced to the person who harmed you. The Greek word is aphimai, and it means to let go, to release, to send away. Forgiveness is the decision to stop holding the debt. It is putting down the ledger you have been maintaining, releasing your right to collect, and handing the entire matter over to a God who sees more clearly than you do and judges more justly than you ever could. Which means forgiveness is not primarily a gift to the person who hurt you. It is release for the person carrying it. Resentment is the only poison a human being can drink, in the hope that someone else will suffer. The person who wronged you may be asleep tonight, entirely untroubled, while you conduct the argument again at 2 a.m. for the 400th time. They are not in the room. You are the only one in the room. If there is a name you have been carrying, and for many people watching this, there is, and it has been years, hear the invitation rather than the accusation. He is not telling you to declare it fine. He is telling you that you are allowed to set it down, not because they deserve it, because you have been carrying it long enough, and because the God who saw everything that was done to you is entirely capable of handling it without your help. Teaching 18. Treasure the eye and the two masters where the heart actually lives. Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. No man can serve two masters. Ye cannot serve God and mammon. Matthew 6:19-24. 3 images in rapid succession, and they are one argument. The first is the treasure. Note the reasoning Jesus gives against earthly treasure. It is not moral, it is practical. Where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. He is not saying that possessions are wicked. He is saying they are unreliable. Moth destroys fabric, which in that world was a primary form of stored wealth. Rust, the Greek is broader, covering corrosion, and also the gnawing of vermin, destroys grain and metal. Thieves take the rest. Every category of earthly wealth is subject to a category of loss. It is not that treasure on earth is evil, it is that it does not hold. Then the line that turns the whole thing inward. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Notice the direction, because it is the reverse of what we assume. We think the heart leads and the treasure follows. I invest in what I care about. Jesus says the opposite. The treasure leads and the heart follows. Where you put your resources is where your affection will migrate, which makes generosity a tool and not merely a duty. If you want to care about something, put something into it, and the caring will grow around the investment like tissue around a graft. This is why people love what they have sacrificed for, and why the surest way to grow cold toward the kingdom of God is to stop giving anything to it. The second image is the eye. The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. That word single, hapless, means simple, undivided, unclouded, and in the idiom of the day, a good eye also meant a generous person, while an evil eye meant a stingy one, which is almost certainly the double meaning intended. The eye is the aperture. What you look at is what gets in, and what gets in is what you become. There is no such thing as neutral input. Everything you consistently look at is forming you slowly, whether you consented to the formation or not. The third image is the two masters, and here Jesus makes the argument absolute. No man can serve two masters. Not should not, cannot. In the ancient world, a slave belonged wholly to one owner. Divided ownership was a legal impossibility. What Jesus is describing is not a hard balancing act. It is a structural impossibility. And the second master he names is mammon, an Aramaic word for wealth that carries an unsettling implication. Jesus personifies it. He does not call it a thing. He treats it as a rival lord with a will of its own, something that makes demands, promises security, extracts loyalty, and rewards obedience. Anyone who has ever felt money quietly dictating a decision they knew was wrong will recognize the accuracy of the personification. The question this passage asks is not how much do you have. It is, which one is giving the orders? Teaching. 19. Take no thought. Consider the birds. Consider the lilies. Therefore I say unto you, take no thought for your life, what ye shall eat or what ye shall drink. Behold the fowls of the air, for they sow not, neither do they reap. Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They toil not, neither do they spin. And yet I say unto you, that even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. Matthew 6:25-29. This may be the most tender passage in the entire sermon. And the word take no thought has aged badly in English. It does not mean be careless or refuse to plan. The Greek is merimnao, from a root meaning to divide or pull apart. It describes the mind fragmented, pulled in pieces, the same thought circling with no resolution. It is not planning. It is the thing that happens at 3 a.m. that has never once in the history of the world solved anything. And look at where he takes them. Not to an argument, to a hillside. Behold the fowls of the air. He is teaching outdoors. There were birds over that valley as he spoke, and everyone could see them. And the observation is exact. They sow not, neither do they reap, nor gather into barns. The 3 stages of agricultural food security, the entire risk management system of that society, and birds participate in none of it. Yet your heavenly Father feedeth them. Are ye not much better than they? That is the argument, and it runs from the lesser to the greater. He is not saying birds do not work. Birds work constantly. He is saying they do not carry the future. They do not lie awake about next season. Then, consider the lilies of the field. The Greek word he uses for consider is stronger than the one used for the birds, katamanthano, to study, to learn thoroughly, to examine closely. Go look at one. And these were almost certainly not cultivated flowers, but the wild anemones that carpet the Galilean hills in spring, in blazing scarlet and purple, growing in ground nobody tended, lasting a matter of weeks, and then cut with the grass and burned as fuel in clay ovens. Even Solomon, in all his glory, was not arrayed like one of these. The most magnificent king in the memory of Israel, in his full state robes, was outdressed by a weed with a 2-week lifespan growing in a field nobody owned. The theological point is devastating in its gentleness. God's care for the world is not utilitarian. He did not have to make the anemones beautiful. Nothing required it. A functional flower would have done the job. The extravagance is gratuitous. It exists because the one who made it is that kind of God. And if that is how he attends to something that will be firewood by the end of the month, the question forms itself. What exactly do you think he is doing about you? Then the most practical sentence in the passage. Which of you, by taking thought, can add 1 cubit unto his stature? Anxiety has an efficacy of precisely 0. It has never added an hour. It has never changed an outcome. It only ever subtracts quietly from the life you are actually living while you are busy rehearsing the one you are afraid of. And then, the redirection, which is the whole answer. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Notice that he does not say the things do not matter. He acknowledges the need directly. Your heavenly Father knoweth that ye have need of all these things. The instruction is not to stop needing. It is to reorder. Put the kingdom first, and the rest arrives in its proper place behind it. Put the rest first, and you will find you have lost both, because the anxious pursuit of security never produces security. It only produces more pursuit. He closes with a sentence that has carried more exhausted people through more hard nights than almost any other. Take therefore no thought for the morrow, for the morrow shall take thought for the things of itself. Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. You have today's grace for today's trouble. You do not have tomorrow's grace yet, which is precisely why tomorrow feels unbearable when you drag it into tonight. It is not unbearable. It is simply not yet supplied. And it will be on the morning it becomes today. Teaching. 20. Judge not the beam and the mote. Judge not, that ye be not judged. And why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but considerest not the beam that is in thine own eye? Matthew 7:1-3. This is the most quoted verse in the Bible by people who have never read the sermon it comes from, and it is almost universally misapplied. It is used to mean that no one may ever assess anything about anyone. That cannot be what Jesus meant, because 4 verses later in this same paragraph, he tells his hearers to distinguish between what is holy and what is not, and 8 verses later he tells them to identify false prophets by their fruit. He is not forbidding discernment. He is forbidding something else. The Greek krino means to pass sentence, to render a verdict. The activity being forbidden is not noticing. It is judging, in the sense of assuming the seat, deciding a person's worth, condemning them as a whole, closing the case. And the reasoning he gives is a mirror. With what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged. The standard you build is the standard you will be measured against, which should terrify anyone who has constructed a rigorous one for other people and a generous one for themselves. Then comes the picture, and it is deliberately ridiculous. A man with a mote in his eye, a speck of sawdust, is being examined by a man with a beam in his own. The Greek dokos is a load-bearing roof timber. Jesus was a carpenter's son. These were the 2 objects from his own trade. And the joke, if we are willing to hear it as one, is a man walking around with an entire ceiling joist protruding from his face, squinting, offering to perform delicate eye surgery on someone else. That is the mechanism he is exposing. The more damaged our own vision, the more confident we become about other people's. Criticism of others is frequently the anesthetic we apply to our own condition. And notice, he does not say, "Leave the speck alone." He says, "First cast out the beam out of thine own eye, and then shalt thou see clearly to cast out the mote out of thy brother's eye." There is still a removal to be done, and it is still an act of love to help someone with what is in their eye. But you have to be able to see, and nobody working on another person's eye with a beam in their own has ever been gentle enough to be trusted with it. Teaching. 21. Ask, seek, knock, and the one line that sums up everything. Ask, and it shall be given you. Seek, and ye shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. If ye, then, being evil, know how to give good gifts unto your children, how much more shall your Father which is in heaven give good things to them that ask him? Matthew 7:7-11. After the severity of judge not, the tone opens out into some of the warmest verses Jesus ever spoke. All 3 verbs, aiteo, zeteo, krou, are present imperatives in Greek, which carry the sense of continuous action. Keep asking, keep seeking, keep knocking. This is not a formula for instant delivery. It is an invitation to persistence, spoken to people who were about to spend the rest of their lives waiting on God for things that did not arrive quickly. And the 3 verbs escalate. Asking is verbal. You simply speak. Seeking involves movement. You get up and look. Knocking involves arriving at a specific door and staying there. The intensity increases, and so does the involvement of your whole life. Then comes the argument, and it is the argument from the lesser to the greater again, only this time it cuts closer. What man is there of you, whom if his son ask bread, will he give him a stone? Or if he ask a fish, will he give him a serpent? Both pairings are visual jokes with a serious edge. The small limestone rounds on the Galilean shore look almost exactly like the flat loaves of that region, and certain eels in the lake were serpentine and non-kosher. Jesus is describing a father who hands his hungry child something that looks like food and is not, a cruel trick, a counterfeit, and he says, "None of you would do that. Not one of you." Then the line that carries the weight, "If ye, then, being evil, know how to give good gifts unto your children, how much more shall your Father?" He does not flatter his audience. Being evil is not a softening phrase. He grants the worst assessment of human nature and then argues from it. Even at your worst, you would not hand your child a stone. So what conclusion should you draw about the one who is not evil at all? And then, at the end of it, he compresses the entire ethical content of the sermon, of the law and the prophets, he says, into a single sentence. "Therefore all things whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them." Versions of this rule existed before him, but almost always in the negative. Do not do to others what you would not want done to you. That formulation is satisfiable by inaction. You can keep it perfectly by staying home and touching nothing. Jesus makes it positive, and in doing so makes it inexhaustible. It is no longer about what you refrain from. It is about what you initiate, which means it can never be completed, only practiced. Teaching. 22. The narrow gate, the 2 trees, and the most frightening verse. "Enter ye in at the strait gate, because strait is the gate, and narrow is the way, which leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it. Not every one that saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he that doeth the will of my Father." Matthew 7:13-14:21. The sermon does not end gently. Jesus finishes with a series of divisions: 2 gates, 2 trees, 2 confessions, 2 builders, and every one of them requires a choice. The narrow gate first. The Greek stenos means constricted, tight. And what makes it narrow is not that God is stingy with entry. It is what cannot fit through it. You cannot carry your self-justification through a narrow gate. You cannot bring your resume of religious achievement, your comparison with people worse than you, your carefully maintained reputation. The gate is exactly as wide as a person with empty hands, which is why the sermon opened with the poor in spirit. He is closing the circle he began 3 chapters ago. Then the 2 trees, given as a test for false prophets. "Ye shall know them by their fruits, not by their eloquence, not by their following, not by their confidence." Fruit is the one form of evidence that cannot be manufactured quickly and cannot be faked over time. A tree's nature eventually becomes visible in what hangs from its branches, and no amount of leaf can substitute. This is a mercy to anyone trying to work out whom to trust. Give it time and watch what grows. And then, verse 21, which is one of the most sobering sentences in the New Testament. "Not every one that saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven." He describes people who prophesied in his name, cast out demons in his name, did many wonderful works in his name, a resume of extraordinary religious activity, and to whom he says, "I never knew you." Sit with the word he uses. Not I never approved of you. Not you did not do enough. I never knew you. The Greek ginosko is the word of relationship, of personal acquaintance, of 2 parties who actually know each other. which tells you, finally and unmistakably, what this entire sermon has been about. It was never about performance. The whole architecture, the Beatitudes, the reframings, the secret giving, the closed door of the storeroom, the Father who sees, has been describing a relationship, not a resume. It is possible to build an impressive spiritual life around a God you have never actually met. And the terrifying thing about verse 21 is not that God is harsh. It is that a person can be that busy, that religious, that publicly effective, and still be a stranger. The remedy is not to try harder. It is to go into the room and shut the door and begin talking to the Father, who is already there. Teaching 23. The two builders, the storm that tests every house. Therefore, whosoever heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them, I will liken him unto a wise man, which built his house upon a rock. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew, and beat upon that house. And it fell not, for it was founded upon a rock. Matthew 7:24-25. He ends with a story, and it is the perfect ending, because it is about what happens to everything he has just said the moment a person walks back down the hill. 2 men, 2 houses, and here is the detail everyone misses. From the outside, the 2 houses may have looked identical. Nothing in the parable suggests one was shabby. The difference was entirely below the surface, in a layer nobody could see, made on a day when the weather was fine, and it seemed like an unnecessary amount of work. Anyone who has spent a summer in that region knows exactly what he is describing. The wadis of Israel are dry riverbeds, flat, sandy, sheltered, easy to dig, and by far the most attractive place to build during the dry season. Then the winter rains come, and water off the hills funnels through those channels with terrible force, and everything in them goes. And notice, the storm hits both houses. The rain descended, the floods came, the winds blew, and beat upon that house. The identical phrase is used for both. Jesus does not promise the wise builder a milder life. The weather is the same. The wise builder gets no exemption from grief, illness, betrayal, loss, or the ordinary catastrophes of being a human being. What he gets is a house that is still standing afterward. And the difference between the 2 men is stated in a single word. Both of them heard. The wise man heard these sayings of mine, and doeth them. The foolish man heard these sayings of mine, and doeth them not. The difference is not information. Both men had the same sermon. The difference is what they did on the ordinary Tuesday afterward. This is the reason this teaching has to end where it does. You have now heard the Sermon on the Mount, more slowly and more completely than most people ever will, and that fact, by itself, has changed nothing. Hearing was never the foundation. Hearing is what both men did. The foundation is one act of obedience, this week, in the thing you already know about. The phone call, the apology, the thing you need to put down, the door you need to shut so you can pray behind it. That is the digging. It will feel small. It will feel disproportionate to the size of this teaching. It always does, on a clear day, in a dry riverbed, with no weather in sight. Teaching 24. And the people were astonished, the voice at the end of the sermon, and it came to pass, when Jesus had ended these sayings, the people were astonished at his doctrine, for he taught them as one having authority, and not as the scribes. Matthew 7:28-29. The Greek word for astonished is ekpleso, and it means to be struck out of yourself, knocked from your position. It is a violent word for what a sermon did to a crowd of farmers. And Matthew tells us exactly what struck them. It was not the content, remarkable as it was. It was the authority. Every teacher they had ever heard operated by citation. A scribe taught by chaining authorities. Rabbi Hillel said, "On the authority of Rabbi so-and-so who received it from the tradition, their credibility was entirely borrowed, and that was considered proper. Originality was suspect. And this man sat down on a hillside and said 6 times in a row, 'But I say unto you,' setting his own words alongside the law of Sinai, not to contradict it, but to bring out what it always meant on no authority but his own. He never once cited a source. He spoke as though the words were his to speak. There are only 2 possible responses to a man who does that. Either he is an unbearable arrogance, or he is exactly who he later claimed to be. There is no comfortable third category, and the sermon itself makes sure of that. A person can admire the ethics of the Sermon on the Mount at a distance. Nobody can admire the voice in it at a distance, because the voice is claiming something. That is why the sermon does not permit neutrality. It is not a collection of good advice from a wise teacher. It is the seated king describing his kingdom and inviting the people on the hillside, and everyone who would ever hear the echo of it afterward, to come in. So let it come back one more time, all of it, quickly, the way it would have sounded walking home down that hill in the late afternoon. Blessed are the poor in spirit. You do not have to arrive with anything. Empty hands are the entry. Blessed are they that mourn. The grief you have been managing alone is the very place he has committed himself to come and sit. Blessed are the meek. Strength under his direction is not weakness, and the ground finally goes to those who stopped fighting for it. Blessed are they which hunger and thirst after righteousness. The wanting is the sign of life, and the filling is guaranteed. Ye are the salt of the earth. Ye are the light of the world. Before he asked you for anything, he told you what you already are. Leave there thy gift before the altar and go. Reconciliation before worship, every time. Love your enemies. Not a feeling to manufacture, an action to choose, and a family resemblance to your Father, who sends rain on people who never thank him for it. Thy Father, which seeth in secret. Every unnoticed kindness of your entire life has had an audience. Our Father, which art in heaven. Not a formula, a family, and a door that is open in the plainest room in your house. Forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. You are allowed to set it down. You have carried it long enough. Consider the lilies. If he dressed a weed like that, consider what he thinks of you. Take therefore no thought for the morrow. You have today's grace for today's trouble, and tomorrow's is not late. It is simply not yet due. Ask, and it shall be given you. Keep asking. He is not a father who hands his children stones, built his house upon a rock. The storm comes to every house. The digging is what decides how the morning after looks. He is still seated. He is still teaching. And the hillside is still open. If this teaching found you today, here is the one thing I want to ask of you before you go, and it has nothing to do with me. Somebody came into your mind while you were watching this. Maybe it was during the Beatitude about mourning. Maybe it was when we talked about the name you have been carrying and not forgiving. Maybe it was during the birds and the lilies, and you thought of someone who has not been sleeping. You know who it was. Send them this video. Not with a lecture attached, not with an explanation, just send it. Say, "This made me think of you," that's all. Somebody sends a link, and a person who has been quietly drowning for months finally hears that the God of the universe has committed himself, in advance, to sitting down beside people exactly like them. That is a small act of love with a very long reach, and it costs you one message. And if you want to stay for what comes next, subscribing is free and takes one tap. We're going to keep going deep like this, verse by verse, unhurried, all the way down. One last thing before I let you go. Tell me in the comments which line landed, not the whole video. One line, one verse, the single sentence that went somewhere you needed it to go. I read them, and there is something remarkable about watching a few thousand people name the exact words that reach them, all in one place, all at once. And now, the blessing. May the God who calls the empty-handed blessed meet you exactly where your hands are empty tonight. May he be the comfort that comes and sits down in your grief instead of hurrying you out of it. May he give you today's bread today, and free you from the weight of a tomorrow that has not arrived. May every secret, unwitnessed, unthanked good you have ever done be counted by the Father who sees in secret. May the thing you have been carrying be set down this week, and may your house be dug deep and founded on rock, so that when the rain descends and the floods come, and the winds blow and beat upon it, and they will, you are still standing in the morning and still His. God bless you, wherever in the world you are watching from. Go and do them. I'll see you in the next one.